noisy.
Thank you very much, boys and girls. At this time, if we could all rise for the colors as they enter the gym. And please stay standing after the colors are posted.
Color guard, attention! Color guard, advance! Color guard, halt! Color guard, post the colors. Salute! I pledge allegiance to the flag
At this time, if we could stay standing for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Boys and girls, honored guests, staff, and Dr. Stott, if he's still here, I'd like to thank you for joining us in celebration today of Veterans Day. There are a few people I want to thank and single out as we get started. First and foremost, I'd like to thank students for helping us out. I'd like to thank our Boy Scouts and our, for presenting the colors today. So if we could give the Boy Scouts one more round of applause, please. Thank you. As every good leader knows, you need a tremendous support cast to make any event take place, and I am not immune to that fact as well. So the following staff members I'd like to single out. Mrs. LaFountain, our kindergarten teacher, who's going to be taking a lot of our cards that we have written this afternoon to the Veterans Home. Mrs. LaFountain, if you could please rise. Also, go ahead, I'm sorry. All right, she said they're going to be wrapped up nice and they'll be there today, so thank you, Mrs. LaFountain. We can hold our applause to the end for the following folks, but Mrs. Mallon, Mrs. Schaefer, Miss Swayway, Mrs. Riggs, Mrs. Salt, thank you very much for putting the breakfast together this morning. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Student Council for their warm welcome and greeting this morning, so thank you to the Student Council. If anyone's familiar with The Wizard of Oz, you know how the wizard's behind the curtain. Well, the wizard is behind the curtain over here, Mrs. Black, for putting this whole thing together, so thank you, Mrs. Black. She may have a big cane and pull me off the stage here. So for those that remember the Gong Show, right, everybody? Right, just us up front might know it. So this morning, though, I'd like to go ahead and just talk a little bit about Veterans Day, the origin of Veterans Day. And for boys and girls, some of this may go over a little bit, but I'm sure if you look it up and talk to your folks that are veterans, you'll know, and they can help understand what Veterans Day is about. First and foremost, though, I'd like to thank all the men and women who are with us today to celebrate their service to this great country of ours. On behalf of this entire school community, we want to thank you for your service and dedication. Additionally, there are many others who are currently serving or have served that could not be here with us today to join our celebration. And so I would ask that we keep them in our thoughts, our hearts, our prayers. And that was what I was hoping for with this moment of silence this morning, is to keep our brothers and sisters who are currently serving this country, keep them in our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers. There are a few words that really stand out when I think of Veterans Day. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. I won't go long, I promise you. But first and foremost is honor. The honor of serving. And that's probably the most important word I want boys and girls you to take away today, and that's service. That implies dedication, motivation, esprit de corps. And teachers, you can help me maybe define these words a little bit later on today. Intestinal fortitude. That's my favorite word. Having the courage, the intestinal fortitude to carry on whatever that mission may be. And then finally, and most importantly to me, is service. Today, though, I thought not only those words, but it'd be nice to talk briefly about why we even have a Veterans Day. And why do we have to celebrate, or why do we celebrate those that have served? According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, while those who died are also remembered on Veterans Day, today is a day set aside to honor all those who served honorably in the military in wartime or peacetime. It goes on to explain that the holiday is largely intended to thank the living veterans for their service, to acknowledge that their contributions to our national security are appreciated, and to underscore the fact that those who have served, not only those that have died and sacrificed and done their duty, And you guys might be aware that Memorial Day is the day we set aside to celebrate those that have died in service of their country. Today is to celebrate anyone and everyone that has served and is currently living. All right, here's a fact, and no, I was not around when this started. Did you know that the roots of Veterans Day goes back over 100 years? I'm almost positive it's 104 years, if I did my math correctly. Mrs. Garman, you'll check me on that, okay? Fighting during World War I stopped in 1918. And again, I was not around for that. So those who think I was not. Due to an armistice between the Germans and the Allies. Armistice, that's a fancy word, means an agreement to stop fighting. November 11th was commemorated as Armistice Day by President Woodrow Wilson in 1919. A resolution passed by Congress in 1926 called for November 11th to be remembered every year, and as the president said, with thanksgiving and prayer and exercises designed to perpetuate peace through goodwill and mutual understanding between nations. Then there's a few years, and then in 1938, Armistice Day was made the official legal holiday. And then many American soldiers lost their lives during World War II and the Korean War. And in the wake of these wars, Armistice Day was renamed Veterans Day in 1954. Then there was a period of time where the actual celebration of Veterans Day fluctuated between various dates. It was only President Gerald Ford who signed a bill in 1975, I was around in 75, which pushed Veterans Day back to November 11th, with the changes taking place officially since 1978. President Ford said in his statement that he felt that the restoration of observance of Veterans Day to November 11th will help preserve in the hearts and lives of all Americans the spirit of patriotism and love of country, and the willingness to serve, the willingness to sacrifice for the common good that's symbolized by this special day. So we're here today to celebrate and honor those that have served this country. All right, so I provided a little bit of background. I told you I wasn't going to go long. So I provided a little background as to the why Veterans Day was established. And I would like to close this morning with a comment or two about service. Service means the act of helpful. It's a helpful activity. Help in general. Aid, or in today's case, is the act of providing aid to one's country. Every member of the armed forces since the end of the Vietnam War have volunteered their service to protect our country. Every branch of the armed service serves a purpose, and through a complicated, sometimes overly complicated network, we end up working together to keep everyone safe. Everyone has a role. Each service has a role. And within the service, there's many other roles, but we work together for a common good. It's through this large network that they provide us with the freedoms, the safety, the security, and there's many times that we take those freedoms for granted. Today is the day we pause for a few minutes and remember that freedom isn't free. And it takes the men and women of our country, like the ones we are celebrating today, to ensure that these freedoms don't disappear. Now, there's some other things that I have to take care of. And I would be remiss if my Marine Corps friends, can you raise a hand, please? Okay. I would sing happy birthday, but I do believe that the Marine Corps birthday is today as well. Yesterday, like I said, yesterday. And I think the Marine Corps is 247?
Yes.
Okay, we're approaching the big number there of 250, so I will say happy birthday yesterday, belated birthday to the Marine Corps. I'd also like to highlight a few friends. Mr. and Mrs. Garrison, I'm going to go ahead and highlight them, okay? Mr. Garrison and Mrs. Garrison, do you guys mind standing up for a second and do the pageant wave for me? All right, so Mr. Garrison here is served in World War II Philippines. He's a free young age of 97, and his wife of 74 years is 95. If we could give them a round of applause and thank you. I'm hoping to make 55. 97, 95 years old. Congratulations on that. Thank you for your service in World War II. They've been together, I think, since the 4th grade. Friends, guys. They've been friends since 4th grade, married for 74 years. Let me highlight that. Okay, they're crazy. So I'd like to congratulate them and thank them very much for joining us today in our celebration. Listen, lastly, I'd like to thank you and everyone in this room for the honor of presenting to you today. I'd like to thank you for your service to our country. I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of my 6th grade friends that have some special words that they would like to share. If I could please bring Brooke Jose and Ford. I was going to call him Chevy today, but I won't. But if Ford and Brooke could please come forward.
Today we would like to share with you some facts about Veterans Day and why we celebrate it when we do.
Veterans Day is celebrated on November 11th because during World War I in 1918, the Germans surrendered on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
The annual holiday was previously known as Armistice Day, and it was originally set up to commemorate the end of World War I in 1918. But then in 1954, it changed to Veterans Day.
At 11 a.m. on Veterans Day, there's a 2-minute moment of silence to remember all the veterans who served or fought in the military. Many buildings of that have the American flag is hung halfway during the moment of silence.
On September 27, 1920, the poppy became the official flower of the American Legion family to memorize the soldiers who have served and died during the war.
In 1926, Congress passed a resolution to make Veterans Day an annual holiday, but it didn't become a federal holiday until 1938.
On Veterans Day, because it is a federal holiday, you don't receive mail or other federal services may be suspended as well.
In 1926, the 624-acre Arlington National Cemetery is home for the final resting place for over 400,000 military service people and their family members. Every year it holds an observance at 11 a.m., the time when the World War I armistice was signed. During the Veterans Day commemoration at Arlington National Cemetery, guards lay a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldiers.
Did you know that almost half the U.S. presidents were veterans?
People get Veterans Day and Memorial Day confused. The difference is Memorial Day is for the soldiers who died at war. Veterans Day is for the people who served in the military.
In 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Holiday Act, which put Veterans Day on the 4th Monday in October. It took effect in 1971, but in 1975, President General Ford signed a law returning it to November 11th.
The New York City Veterans Day Parade, which takes place along Fifth Avenue, is both the largest and oldest Veterans Day parade in the country. The first one was held in 1919.
Normally, people wear red, white, or blue on Veterans Day. The simple gesture of wearing patriotic colors can pay tribute. It will also create conversation among peers and give you an opportunity to remind everyone that it's Veterans Day. November 11th is the day that we honor those who have dedicated their lives to protecting our freedom and democracy.
And now, Eliana Nine has a poem for us.
What does it mean to be courageous? Being courageous doesn't mean that you're bigger or tougher than others. It means that you're brave enough to step up and possibly risk your life to save others. It takes a lot of courage to be in the military. Some people don't have that courage. We should be extremely thankful for people like veterans who put their lives in danger to protect ours. My pal was in the Army a while back and unfortunately passed recently. He was a very kind and brave human being. Sometimes people think soldiers may be mean people, but soldiers are the kindest people alive. We probably wouldn't be alive if we didn't have soldiers in our lives. Courage doesn't mean that you aren't afraid, it means that you may be afraid, but you do something anyway. Today we are grateful for all of the men and women who face their fears, show tremendous courage, and protect our freedom. Our final presentation is Michaela Amanda.
Flags raised as the soldiers march across the field. The community crowds around with love and support for the new era. Tears shed around the nation for loved ones lost. Smiles for the ones who remain. Uniforms transform the stone road to a green grass. Soldiers take in all the cheers and gratitude with confidence and joy. As the parade comes to a close, the hardworking men and women reunite with the ones they left behind. Hugs scatter across the soldiers as tears tag along.
I would like to thank my 6th grade friends. They were nervous. When I gave them a high five, they were nervous. Okay? You guys did an outstanding job. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I'm a little nervous too. It's all good. At this time, we have a small presentation, a short presentation that we will kick off. No pressure, Mrs. Black.
America's White Table, written by Margot Feist Raven, illustrated by Mike Benny, read aloud by Mrs. Riggs, East Vincent Librarian, music by the United States Military Bands. America's White Table. It was just a little white table, but it brought tears of pride to my Uncle John's eyes the Veterans Day he came for dinner and stood by it, set for one person, even though nobody would be eating at it. It was just a little white table, but earlier that day, Mama had told Gretchen, Samantha, and me the little table we were setting for Veterans Day was just like the ones that have stood across America in the dining halls of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force since the Vietnam War ended. The tables honor the men and women who serve in America's armed forces, especially those missing in action, our MIAs, and those held prisoner of war, our POWs. It was just a little white table, but it felt as big as America when we helped Mama put each item on it and she told us why it was so important. We use a small table, girls, she explained first, to show one soldier's lonely battle against many. We cover it with a white cloth to honor a soldier's pure heart when he answers his country's call to duty. We place a lemon slice and grains of salt on a plate to show a captive soldier's bitter fate and the tears of families waiting for loved ones to return, she continued. We push an empty chair to the table for the missing soldiers who are not here. We lay a black napkin for the sorrow of captivity and turn over a glass for the meal that won't be eaten, she said. We place a white candle for peace and finally a red rose in a vase tied with a red ribbon for the hope that all our missing will return someday. Mama finished speaking just as sunlight spilled on the table and filled the overturned glass. It was just a little white table, but it suddenly made me want to burst with a feeling I couldn't explain when Mama told us how much our setting the white table would mean to Uncle John that night. Then she told us something we didn't know. Our Uncle John, who gave us big bear hugs and spun us with airplane twirls and called me his Katie girl, was a POW in Vietnam before we were born. It was just a little white table, but it gave us the courage to ask Mama what happened to Uncle John in Vietnam. She quietly told us his story. When Uncle John served in Vietnam, he was sent on a rescue mission, and his helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines, she began. And he and his 3 crew members were taken prisoner. One crew member, named Mike, had serious wounds from the crash, but Uncle John and the other men tried to help Mike get better and persuaded a guard to bring Mike medicine. Then one day, when a guard looked away, Uncle John and the others had a chance to escape. But Mike was still too sick to go, so Uncle John stayed behind because he wouldn't leave a fellow soldier alone so far from home. But how did Uncle John get free? We asked Mama. Sometime later, Uncle John had a chance to escape again, and somehow he was able to take Mike with him, carrying him on his back and collecting just enough rainwater and big leaves to help keep them alive until Uncle John found an American infantry unit to help them. But even though Uncle John did everything he could to bring Mike home alive, Mike's wounds were just too serious, and he died before the rescue helicopter landed. I know that Mike was only 20 years old and he dreamed of playing football, but he loved America enough to give his life for his country when duty called. And I know how much Uncle John loves America too, but he learned when helping Mike that a soldier risks his life for a fellow soldier because the best of your country lives in every man and woman who would lay down their life for you too. It was just a little white table, but it needed words of gratitude, like Mama's Thanksgiving meal. So before Uncle John arrived for dinner, Gretchen and Samantha and I decided to put 3 gifts of our own on the table to honor our veterans. Gretchen colored pictures of all the objects on the table, and Samantha wrote out the words of My Country 'Tis of Thee as a tribute in song. But I didn't know what I, a 10-year-old girl, could ever put on the table that was as important as each veteran's gift of freedom to me. It was just a little white table, but I looked at it all dinner long, and in the quiet inside me, I could almost hear the silent soldiers of the empty chairs saying, "Remember us, please. We are real people like your Uncle John and Mike, who left families and friends, homes and dreams of our own to protect your birthright of liberty from disappearing as easily as sunlight from a glass." It was just a little white table, but it took my words away when I hugged Uncle John goodnight and wanted to thank him for serving our country so bravely. So I just hugged him even harder and told him I loved him. Uncle John hugged me back even harder than I had hugged him. And that's when I knew what to put on the table. My promise to put the words from my heart into a little book about America's white table. And in the book, I used Gretchen's pictures and Samantha's song and Mama's story about Uncle John and his friend Mike, because I hoped that everyone who read it would set a white table on Veterans Day too, so the brave Americans the little table honors won't ever feel forgotten by the country they loved so much. Then in the salt on the little white table, I traced in the grains of their families' tears what each man and woman who serves America is to me, a hero. And that's when I saw the tears of pride fill my Uncle John's eyes. The end.
Thank you, Mrs. Riggs. At this time, if 3rd grade could please rise.
America's white table, buddy.
you, third grade. Thank you, Mrs. Salt. I tried to hit those high notes, but it wasn't working, so I appreciate you guys singing that. Thank you. As we bring today's celebration to a close, I would like to once again thank all of my staff who helped put this day together. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it. And also, most importantly, to the veterans, the men and women that have served this country, that have joined us today, and for many more who are not with us today because of other commitments, thank you. I appreciate your service. Boys and girls, at this time, I would like you to give your attention to your teachers. Teachers, thank you for bringing them down here in a nice way. If we could then make our way back to our classroom. Thank you very much, and I want to wish everyone a happy Veterans Day. Thank you.